Corona throw me home alone a lockdown. How about that? Yeah, you like that. Let's carry on. So, should we have approached lockdown differently? That is the next question that I had to answer. Now, or at least that I had to ponder upon for us to speculate on and maybe come and answer with. Now, we've just done the video covering government knowledge on coronaviruses and biological weapons. Now, with those in mind, but putting them slightly more aside, this is an isolated question in its own, and I think that this is a fair question. And I think it's a fair question to speculate on right now because it's relevant to right now. It's we're at the stage of the coronavirus where we can start to question the motives, and they are. People are doing it in the media. Not fairly though. They're just sort of doing it as a rant of fear and anger and just general controversy. And so this is where it starts. Initially, obviously, it was challenging to say. It can be to be fair to say that the knowledge would have been presented as quite challenging. At the beginning of any kind of pandemic or any kind of commotion that happens throughout the world, knowledge obviously is what it is. You know what you know. You're not sure what you don't. And fair enough that this was something whereby the information was slow to be finalised. However, we did see examples of people ignoring certain bits of information. I'm not going to go into it. There's too many sides. I'm not going to allocate blame. But as I say, in our previous videos, we have established that governments have been aware of pandemics before, have been aware of coronavirus outbreaks before, and do have a history of tinkering with biological states of matter. And so I feel like because so many people think that this is the first coronavirus in the world because it's the first time this has happened and this has been the first lockdown, I feel like they're cutting more slack than they probably should. Not exactly for our leaders. Maybe our leaders might not have experienced it firsthand. After all, for example, Boris Johnson's quite new as a Prime Minister. But nonetheless, as far as pandemics and that goes, as I say, there's been tons. There's been tons of different states of emergencies. Not to this severity, but remember the worldwide lockdown was coordinated by governments themselves. We weren't forced into lockdown. You can argue that it was the best method, but the government themselves chose to do what they did. And one thing I'm definitely going to say is that my government, especially, in my opinion, my government seemed very slow to react in terms of shifting gear from the first thing. So basically, the very first thing it came out with is the thing that it seems to have stuck with, which is we know limited stuff about coronavirus. Stay inside, stay indoors, stay away from everybody. Everybody's just been following the advice of WHO. Now, I find it interesting that in this last week, they're starting to talk about vaccines. Apparently, we now have a beta test vaccine that we're going to start testing on people. I'm concerned about. More on that later. But nonetheless, I suppose what it really comes down to is the way in which they presented the lockdown, I think, it may or may not have been justified at the time. I think that they did well to overstep the mark. But one of the things that got me to start doing this video was when they called for the schools to be locked down, which in foresight probably was the better thing. However, I reasoned with some people that I spoke to over the phone that it was nonsensical because when things go around in this country, like a flu or a virus, it doesn't matter how strong or weak it is. The point of it is that if you're trying to stop people from being sick, the way in which you stop them from getting something completely, that's never going to happen. What we tend to do in this country is we let it sweep and we tell the vulnerable to stay away, as we do with the winter flu. And I found it very interesting that they pulled all the kids out of school because I said, for example, if they pull all the kids out of school, kids aren't going to stay at home. They're just going to play outside. You're not going to keep kids inside forever. That's just mental health nonsense, as well as literal nonsense in the sense of a person can't feasibly look after kids 24/7. You got to work. You got to do stuff. And so I said, well, pulling them out of school is going to make a difference. They're still going to get sick by transferring each other on the street. But there you go. And then it went forward, and then it was reasoned that even though perhaps that it wasn't the most practical method, it was the best method. Fair enough. We can. There's sides for both. But at this point, I think I'm able to stand on a decent foot and present my idea on lockdown. So my thesis is this. We should have reacted to lockdown the way that we always do, but to a more extreme level. What do I mean? Well, here's my point of view. So what I would have done is that if you're trying to keep all these vulnerable people from being sick, but you accept that a mass amount of people are just going to get a normal flu symptoms, which they have, and we are now at the point where we can say that they definitely more than not have got normally sick. Let's put the propaganda aside for a second. Then you would keep all the vulnerable people indoors, put them on lockdown, have everyone else carry on with their day. Don't shut down any of the stores and stuff. Everybody can, take in turns getting sick and staying off. There's, kind of a week or two where things fluctuate. Some systems are down. People, some shops are closed. Some warehouses, just stuff like that. But generally speaking, people recover within a week or two. And then the vulnerable that are locked down inside their houses for being vulnerable, they therefore have more services being able to look after them for the people that definitely aren't sick. Because why would you waste your time testing the whole country all stuck in lockdown and wondering if they're all going to get it? That's too much manpower. And also, it's kind of like a moot point because not everybody's going to die if they get it. I mean, okay, let's look at it like this. So I don't know if anyone else out there has experienced the same, but I've had enough conversations to know that in December of last year, a lot of people here got a very violent flu. So I got a fever. I actually got one in December. A couple of people around me got a fever around the time of the flu, and it was just sort of widely accepted that there was a flu going around. One of my friends got pneumonia. Very, very bad pneumonia, almost died. And even though these things are common, it can be reasoned that coronavirus came to the UK in around November, December. It's been reasoned already that it might be around for long before this and we never knew. I don't think that's unreasonable. And so with that in mind, if most people probably have already got it, even if they don't, is it not fair to speculate that if the vulnerable were inside and kept inside and we all carried on, that it would pretty much have the same cause and effect as what we're trying to establish? Because we're not talking about everybody not getting sick. The advice from the government is just to calmly stay at home and isolate for 7 to 14 days. It's well established that we're not all going to die. And so it would have worked both ways. The economy would have been fine. People would have been able to still carry on getting their jobs and and generally speaking, this wouldn't be such a global pandemic because, well, people would have got it and naturally fended it off and would have naturally overcome it. Because there's two ways. Now that I've explained that, let's go back. There's two ways to look at this. Either you try and stop the whole world from getting it, which is impossible. Why? Because the only way you can stop the whole world from getting it is if everybody on the entire planet spent 2 to 4 weeks indoors. That's never going to happen. People have to be out working. NHS, vital key workers, police, all sorts of things. We have to go shopping, etc., etc. It's never going to happen. So you either do that or you let everybody get it. I believe it's called controlled exposure or something like that, but it doesn't matter. And so with everybody getting it, if you're trying to stop the vulnerable dying, then you could have just gone all the effort that we put into locking down everybody. We could have just locked down the vulnerable. Or how do we sort out the vulnerable? Well, that's very, very easy. I do believe in freedom of self. So if you wanted to lock down, you could have just locked yourself down. Why would people not? If you're sitting there going, okay, well, I've got X, Y, Z condition, you hand out the underlying conditions. You say, we're looking out for asthma, pregnancy, chronics, old people, all different types of the vulnerabilities. And people say, well, okay, I want to stay at home. So therefore, if you get sick, yes, fine, there is an overwhelming more pressure to stay at home to ease on the NHS. But if you then got sick, that's of your own accord, your own choice. If you wanted to go out there and like normal with the flu, when they offer you the jab, either you take it or you don't. And I think that would have been a much more practical approach to this. And as I say, I understand that people reacted how they did in the beginning, but I don't as well. Because now that we've looked at it and we've realised the scale to which this has been overly exaggerated, with millions of deaths predicted, and in the sense of that this is not going to kill us all kind of thing, I just feel like there's a proportion factor into that. And so my answer to that is that it is a fair question. There are speculations for both sides. I do believe that people reacted the best that they could in the early stages, but I also believe that being as this is the second lockdown we've gone into, so we had an option to leave lockdown or to do anything we wanted to do with this lockdown, and they've chosen to keep it the exact same and do what they did an ease into recovery, because a lot of people are doing lifts now on their easing their lockdowns and stuff. I feel like it should have been on the table, and it should have been a question. And it concerns me that if they've seen these kind of things before, and also that, you know, I'm not the only person that thinks about stuff logically, so I'm pretty sure someone must have come up with this idea, why it wasn't put into so much consideration. Unless, like I say, unless there's a real big emphasis on the fact that this is man-made, and they were very afraid of, you know, the just the unknown, fear of the unknown. But yeah, that's my answer on that. Yeah, man.